Hello and welcome to the FatBOSS guide to Vectis in Uldir.
This two-phase encounter has very few mechanics and is rather simplistic, however things will go wrong for you fast if you go in blind, so it's important that you're prepared for this fight before you decide to pull it. With that in mind, let's jump straight in.
So this fight forces you to manage the Omega Vector debuff from the pool. This debuff is applied to 3 random players and it just deals ticking damage. When it expires, it jumps to the nearest player and leaves Lingering Infection, a new permanent stackable debuff on the previous host that increases the nature damage they take. This is important and you'll understand why in a moment. Both the Omega Vector and Lingering Infection debuffs cannot be removed, so you're forced to deal with them throughout the entire fight. Your goal is just to keep the Lingering Infection stacks spread as evenly as possible across the entire raid. Now, although this isn't the best way, it certainly is the most simple. Just spread close to the boss and let the debuff randomly jump around your raid. Boss mods will mark the players with the Omega Vector. All they need to do is watch out for other marks and make sure they are not too close to each other to prevent multiple debuffs from jumping to the same player. If a player does get more than a single debuff, you'll need to spot heal them heavily and it is very difficult to get them to spread out again. We used this strategy in both of our heroic kills in the first reset and it worked just fine. Now the stacking nature damage increase gained after the Omega Vector jumps from you is problematic because of Contagion. This cast deals a burst of nature damage to the entire raid and it is unavoidable. To start off with, it's not too much of an issue, but as the raid begins to gain more and more stacks, the damage begins to become more of a problem for your healers. You want to make sure you spot heal players with large stacks before the cast finishes just to make sure they survive the hit. And you want to save healing cooldowns towards the end of the fight where the stacks on the raid are at their greatest. The only other thing to watch out for is the Gestate cast. This hits a random player, stunning them and causing them to deal damage around them for 5 seconds. Players around the person that's hit by this needs to make sure they move from that player just to reduce incoming damage. During this time, a Plague Amalgam will also spawn from that stunned player. This ad needs to be picked up by one of the tanks and brought underneath the boss. It is vital that all DPS swap to this ad immediately when it spawns and kill it off. This is because the ad is casting Immunosuppression, which applies a large healing absorption shield to the entire raid, and if too many of these casts go off, your healers will very quickly fall behind. Last to mention in this phase is that tanks, you will have to manage your Evolving Affliction stacks. This is a stacking dot that the boss applies with his melee attacks. You want to tank swap every 2 stacks or so. Note that this debuff deals nature damage, and as a result you should really avoid gaining the Omega Vector debuff at all times.
Now when Vectis gains full energy, he'll become untargetable and will transition into phase 2. Whilst he's in this new pool form, he'll rush into areas of the room and begin to shoot lines from himself towards random players. Getting hit by one of these lines will deal damage and also apply lingering stacks. These lines are very easy to predict as long as you keep a close eye on the boss, but if you are struggling you can just simply stand far away, giving you more time to react. During this time you'll also notice that plague bombs will spawn all around the room. These circles need to be soaked by a single player to prevent a Plague Amalgam ad from spawning. Just make sure your raid is spread throughout the entirety of this phase, just so everyone is soaked within 8 seconds. Whilst soaking these circles and dodging the lines, you'll also still have to deal with the Omega Vector debuffs from the previous phase. Because you can't keep as a group anymore, instead just have 2 players deal with each debuff whilst keeping far away from the boss so they don't need to worry about the lines. When the boss reappears and phase 1 begins again, players with those debuffs can then just jump them back to the raid and ignore gaining them again until the rest of the raid is caught up with them. But from this point onwards, the fight simply repeats until you either kill him or die from having too many stacks on the raid.
Now if you'd like to see this guide in a written format with all the spell tooltips, loot and achievement information and just something to refer to quickly whilst you're raiding, then do go check out our guide over on Wowhead. A link for that can be found in the description. A big thank you to our sponsor Discord on this guide series. They've recently greatly improved their in-game overlay, so as well as displaying people in your voice channel that you're in, you can also now use text chats, meaning that you no longer need to tab out to keep in touch with your friends or your guild, or for what we find most useful, keeping track of the news through the Wowhead news bot, as well as the individual boss tips that can be found over on our Discord. Now turning on this overlay is super simple. Go into user settings and make sure the overlay is enabled for the game you're playing, click on the overlay setting, enable it, and set a keybind and you're done. Coming soon to the overlay is the ability to pin text channels so you can actually keep part of any Discord channel whilst you play. We'd also like to say a huge thank you to all of our supporters over on Patreon. Your continued support is fantastic and allows us to keep making these videos. A link to all of this can be found in the description below. A big thank you to you guys for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.
Thanks for watching.